Good morning. For today's lesson, we will discuss about the GINOTT model, addressing the situation with sane messages. This model was shaped by Haim GINOTT. Let's look at his main focus and key ideas of the model. He believed that teachers are a decisive and powerful element in the classroom. They create and maintain the environment. They have the power to humanize or dehumanize their students. We know for a fact that a teacher's effectiveness depends on their ability to establish an educational climate that promotes optimal learning. Children who are in constant emotional turmoil cannot learn. To reduce this, GINOTT advocates using congruent communication. This is a kind of communication that has an harmonious and authentic way of talking in which teacher messages to students match the students' feelings about situations and themselves. Let's talk about the responses that teachers show when they are at their best. Primarily, we can do this by sending sane messages, expressing anger appropriately, and it is also beneficial to invite cooperation. Avoid labeling students and correct the students by directing them appropriately. Avoid the perils of praise. Be brief when correcting students and be models of humane behavior. Now, when teachers are at their worst, they tend to fail using congruent communication. They can be caustic and sarcastic and attack the student's character. They can be demanding and deny the student's feelings and label them as lazy, stupid, and so forth. Sometimes they give long and unnecessary lectures and losing their tempers and self control along the way. Sometimes they use phrases to manipulate students, and teachers like this can be poor models of humane behavior. Let's look further at some of Ginott's suggestions for helping teachers function at their best. Initially, we have to send sane messages. Sane messages address the situation without attacking the students, and they accept and acknowledge how students feel. Here is an example of a sane message when two students are talking during quiet time, thus violating the rules. You can say, "This is a quiet time. It needs to be absolutely silent." An insane message, by contrast, might be, "You two are being rude. You have no consideration for others who are trying to work." Good teacher responses simply state the fact, letting students decide for themselves if their behavior is in keeping with what they expect of themselves. Now let's look into suitable ways in expressing anger. We know that teaching is a tough job. Fatigue, frustration, and conflict make teacher anger inevitable. So when you are angry, better responses would be describing what you see and how you feel about it. And Ginot says you should use I messages, like example, "I am angry" or "I am disappointed." You messages attack the students. So when you are angry, good teachers state their demands clearly and firmly. Ginot points out that an anger situation is one of those times when teachers have the full attention of students. The situation affords an opportunity to enrich vocabulary by expressing anger in eloquent terms. Inviting cooperation. Ginot urges teachers to use respectful communication. Invite cooperation rather than demand it. One of the ways to issue the invitation is to decide with the class before an activity is started what kind of personal behavior are required during the activity. By inviting cooperation, teachers begin to break down students' dependency on the teachers. One of the ways suggested by Ginott is to present students with several possible solutions to a problem and let them decide on the one they want to adapt. Accepting and acknowledging feelings. Ginott believes teachers can be especially useful in helping students sort out feelings. Consider young children as an example. Their perception of reality are much different from those of adults. Teachers should not argue with children's perceptions, even when they are obviously wrong. Instead, teachers should strive to acknowledge and understand children's feelings. Children's fears are a matter that should be treated carefully. Adults have the tendency to make light of them. So all you have to do is listen carefully and offer empathetic. Let's talk about labeling. Labeling is disabling. Sometimes when teachers are angry, they tend to say, "You're lazy, irresponsible, and sloppy. You'll never amount to anything if you don't change." But instead, you must use congruent communication and say, "Your grades are low, but if we work together, we can improve them." Statements such as this do not tell students what you think they can or cannot do. Because when teachers believe in students, the students begin to believe in themselves. Let's talk about correction. When correcting by directing, teachers describe the situation and offer acceptable alternative behaviors. Teachers should avoid attacking a student's character. When teachers tell what they see and suggest acceptable alternatives, they become more likely to follow the teacher's suggestions and correct their own behavior. Now, talking about sarcasm, GINOTT has a word of advice for teachers who are tempted to use this. Don't do this. Many adults use sarcasm as a form of wit, but not all students understand them. Sometimes it ends up hurting their feelings and damaging their self-esteem. Now, let's talk about the perils of praise. Who would think that praise could damage a student's self-concept? Well, it can be used to manipulate their feelings. It can have detrimental effects on forming self-image, and it will cause them to be dependent for approval and validation from others. So when praising, only applaud specific acts and only praise when their answer is correct. Moving on, let's confer about GINOTT's special views on discipline. GINOTT describes discipline as a series of little victories. It is not one thing that a teacher does one time. It is a small step, ongoing, and never ending. GINOTT presents many vignettes on discipline that describe disciplinary methods that are inappropriate as well as those that are appropriate. To begin with the negative, he asserts that teachers using inappropriate discipline usually use their tempers, and more are listed below. Now let's look at the appropriate discipline. Teachers use appropriate behavior in the classroom might show recognition of feelings. They might describe the situation and invite cooperation instead. When they correct the student, they are brief and they don't argue. They model the appropriate behavior and does not resort to physical violence. They focus on solutions and are always very helpful. To sum it all up, GINOTT describes discipline as a series of little victories. It is not one thing that a teacher does one time. It is a small step, ongoing and never ending. However, teachers find that more is required when they face hostile and defiant students. GINOTT's suggestions do not provide all the help that teachers need. This time, let's apply the model in a classroom situation. Let's look at our first case study about Anna. Anna is quite docile, and she never disrupts class and does little socializing with other students. She rarely completes an assignment, so this is how we are going to address Anna's quietness. In this situation, inviting cooperation would be helpful instead of demanding it. And rather than labeling her as physically present yet mentally absent, we must encourage Anna to make friends and take part in class discussions by modeling. Accepting Anna's feelings, contributions, and ideas during class discussions may help her gradually build her confidence. Looking at another case study about Tom. Tom is a very hostile student, and this is how we are going to manage his hostility. It will be beneficial to apply correction as direction and giving sane messages. As an educator, It will be advantageous to address Tom's hostile behavior calmly and assertively, emphasizing the importance of respectful communication in the classroom by way of modeling appropriate behaviors. Lastly, whatever negativity arises in a classroom, teachers should always remember to focus on positive learning environment. That's it for our discussion this morning. Thank you so much for listening.